Rosario.
You're all set, whenever you wanna start, we're good to go.
Sorry, I wanted to go shopping.
And that was like, you know, and so
Where is our
here,
Because of style, she wanted to
I think it was.
Yes,
But she was part of
No, he was speeding. And then
last
you're
one
right,
says,
it's
like a
like that,
Camino,
that
or
exactly.
technicians hooked up to artificial intelligence.
And Jane is sick. He wanted to
She got a hundred.
for his
So
son.
within,
And
she told me this morning.
about 10 days,
And
the
she's not,
machines
she
started
sounded
talking to each other in a
terrible.
language.
He had to do that.
I don't think she's got COVID, but they got
Well, they
it.
don't think so.
Anyway,
Well, that's what I'm saying. But they got, whatever they got on the plane, coming back from Spain, because they were fine before they left.
when he
But she may be leaving tomorrow. Yes, Claire and I just broke
and
her
got
elbow.
nine
Yes,
lost
yes,
yes.
And he never left me through it.
They were all lost.
Except the third.
No,
She was like, somehow they were all lost.
Oh, when I read it the other way, that they were all lost, except one.
Except one.
And he got the KGB.
Yes, and they could raise their
We'll just check.
So that's why.
So just, we're gonna wait a little bit because of the parking situation, just allow any stragglers to come in. I hope you noticed my socks. These are quantum physics socks. A gift, isn't that nice?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we were talking about electrons the last two talks, so there they are, buzzing around the nucleus, B. And because they're quantum socks, that means they're uncertain, right? The uncertainty principle.
And there's another pair somewhere else, exactly.
Well, I'm uncertain about that. I don't know where they are.
That's actually the angles of not your nucleus.
Yeah.
And there's a whole marketing thing there, give people quantum socks and go and find a partner.
Yeah, well, I can sell you a pair for $100 each. Okay.
Sorry.
Anyway, before we really get into this, we'll just waste a little bit of time. This Nobel series, you know, when it initially began, 7 years ago, the focus, for me anyway, was clearly the Nobel Prize and the particulars of an individual prize. But as time goes by, it becomes clear that the Nobel Prize are just part of a larger picture because they really reflect science in general and what makes scientists scientists. Why do they become scientists? What makes for really good ones and not so. Actually, we've got a great one of the two with this one, but there are other issues. There are also other prizes, and I'm going to highlight one of them today, the Lasker Prize. It's kind of the American Nobel Prize of sorts, and it often tells you maybe a third of the time, half of the time, who's going to win a Nobel Prize, usually 2 years later. And for me, in this kind of position with a kind of 4 weeks to kind of put stuff together, it's a big help if they did have a Lasker Prize, because all of my work has been done by the Lasker Committee and all of the comments on it, and so that's really been very, very helpful. And in fact, when I get around to the YouTube presentation at the end, by one of the laureates today, I want her to speak for herself, because she's the lead-in to David's 2 talks, and perhaps Valmai's later, with the 3 remaining prizes. So maybe we'll do, we'll just take our chance if they come in. So just remind you, I mean, this has been don't close that completely. Okay, good. This is now the 4th quantum mechanics one, believe it or not. Remember the first one was last year, so that was entanglement at a distance. Einstein's challenge to quantum mechanics. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that one. And then the first one this year that I gave, anyway, the physics prize, was all about tracking electrons with ultra-short light pulses. And then the last time was about squeezing atoms together and electrons together. And they emit different light, different wavelengths when they're smaller and when the squeeze is greater. So that was last week. But this week, we're talking about the coronavirus. Well, we're really not talking about that virus, but we're talking about packaging mRNA. And guess what it's packaged in? A lipid nanoparticle package. So, oh my heavens, it's all falling apart. Well, I don't need that anyway. So, we can't escape a little bit of quantum mechanics again today. The other thing is, I just mentioned a few moments ago, there are lessons, general lessons about science. How does science work at the best levels? Criteria for the Nobels and Lasker Prizes, they're not the same. Future Nobels, I alluded to earlier. What makes a good scientist? Well, you're going to hear her speak for herself later, hopefully. And what's the present state and future of science, and how to prepare for a career in science, quite aside from today's prize. And I'm going to, let's see, just move into long. Now this is an interesting one because these are the number of Nobel Prizes in science by country updated to this year. Not the other prizes, just science. And it's, here's the pointer. You know what's striking about this? This is all Europe. The outrider is Japan, and it's the United States. And if you pile all of Europe together, it's equal to the United States. And, but who's not represented here? The rest of the world. There isn't a Nobel Prize anywhere in the sciences, quite different than Literature Prize and Peace Prize, that kind of thing, but in the sciences. So what does that tell you? Does this mean there isn't any good science happening anywhere else? No. There is a lag, though, isn't there, between the body of work and the award of the prize once the Nobel Committee is assured that it's actually worthy of a prize. Still, it's, isn't it striking that, that China's not here at all, and yet the quality of their work in the last 2 decades certainly deserves that. They've been very well trained, and just as we were by going to Europe and to the UK, or these days to the US, or Europe. And so that's the striking thing for me. So that speaks to the future, doesn't it? I mean, we can't have all of science going on, any worthy science happening in 15% of the world's population. That just ain't so going forward. The brains aren't any different. Opportunity, yes, maybe. And of course, countries like the Soviet Union where we don't know what's going on the engineering side. So that's a very telling slide. And that's why I pointed out in here that representation has to broaden. I mean, the Nobel Prize had this problem in the beginning. Who did they choose? Europeans. Who did they choose among the Europeans? The Northern Europeans, the Swedes, people from Denmark, from Germany, kind of the home crowd, so to speak, with an admiring gesture to the UK, specifically Cambridge and Oxford and Manchester. So those are, and I'm repeating this for the 4th time to hammer it home so you'll never forget it. But this is Richard Feynman's thing about, well, what is science? And he laid down these rules. So I'm going to repeat this. In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what would be implied if this law that we guessed is right. Then we compare it directly with observation to see if it works. If it disagrees with the experiment, it is wrong. And in that simple statement is the key to science. It absolutely is. There isn't any other endeavor that I know of that our humanity has been involved with that is that rigorous about its information. And so it doesn't, and he had a sense of humor here, but not so much. It does not make any difference how beautiful your guess is. Physics is particularly prone for this. They really like beautiful math. And Einstein's general relativity was actually widely accepted long before much of the evidence came in because of the beauty, meaning the symmetry, the simplicity, the directness of the equations. I mean, it's almost like really fine classical music. And it's music if you know how to read the math. And this lecture, so that's the basis. Now, enter the Lasker Prize. This is a big one, it's been around for several decades. Look at these are the current Nobel winners, but 2 years ago, Lasker Debate granted or at least awarded the Lasker Prize to them for exactly what the Nobel Committee awarded the prize for the discovery of a new therapeutic technology based on the modification of messenger RNA. You know, this is a big deal because the technology here developed a good 10 to 20 years before COVID. No one knew anything about COVID, weren't even interested in it. One of the, Drew Weissman was really interested in HIV, certainly not COVID. We were really lucky because this technology was on the shelf. It didn't have to be researched. They knew how to do it at least 2 to 3 years before COVID struck. Thank God. And because that's what saved our bacon. And around the world too. So looking ahead, guess what's coming? Just on this implication that one of these 3 prizes are going to probably win a Nobel, or maybe 2. So what is coming? Retinal imaging, that stuff that you pay extra money for. You win for your eye examination. But this is the one that's going to take a Nobel for sure. If not this coming year, the one next. DeepMind's AlphaFold. So what is DeepMind AlphaFold? It's how to figure out, it's using AI to figure out what they already know the amino acid sequence of proteins and how to determine that. After all, you've got DNA to tell you that. You don't need that. But what you do need to know is, okay, so you have a sequence of amino acids, and this happens to be the order, but how does that change the shape of the protein and therefore its function? So sequence drives, shape drives function with proteins. And this was a very expensive business until this DeepMind's AlphaFold came along. Now, gee, they could block them or knock them off hundreds at a time. Now, mind you, there are many thousands of proteins. The other one, well, I'm not quite sure why they did that. I mean, this is a technique. This is probably something that the Nobel Committee would not have awarded a prize for. And you'll see why in just a minute. So there's AlphaFold. Robert Service is the key guy. AI cracks the code of protein complexes, providing a roadmap and so on. I'm not going to read all this for you, but that's 2021. So that's 2 years ago. So there's going to be a Nobel Prize next year or the year after for them, absolutely for sure. And well, here are our winners this year. Kathleen Rico and Drew Weissman, very different personalities. You notice that she's smiling in almost every picture. He always looks dour and a little down and a man of few words. She's charming. She probably has had to put up with more in life than he, I would suspect. And but we'll get into that later. A very capable team. She's from Hungary originally, born in Hungary, and now has an appointment both at UPenn, which is where he is, when they did a lot of this key work. And remember BioNTech back at the beginning of the pandemic, the German company that hooked up with Pfizer to develop the European or the American, Pfizer's American company, but hooked up to produce one version of an mRNA vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine. So, so she's hooked up well, was in it early. So now, behind the scenes of Nobel Prize in Physics, criteria for selecting a Nobel Prize. Now this is straight out of the mouth of one of the heads of one of their key committees. Now I know the English comes across in translation is a little awkward, but pay attention, because this, what are we looking for? We're looking for a discovery, something new. A way of thinking about a problem in a brand new way, not an invention or an improvement or a tweak to something, and it has to be a very high distinction, and going back right to Nobel himself, some benefit to mankind, recognizing that basic science advances, it might take several decades before you realize the benefit to humankind. So I thought that was an interesting way of now. How can you win a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine, or for that matter, physics and chemistry? How would you do it? This would actually be good advice for somebody in their late teens, early 20s, thinking about a career in science. What do you look for? This is the advice of the Nobel Committee. Okay? Get really fundamental training, basic science training in physiology or medicine. You want to put yourself in top labs. Find the right people, the right mentors. If you're not with the right mentors, leave. Find some others. And you need to make a discovery if you're going to have any impact. Something novel and not trivial. You need to break new ground. You should be a curious person. They really value curiosity in a person and imagination. You should be unafraid of breaking new ground. And this is almost a line from Star Trek here. You must be willing to go where no one else has gone at Star Trek before. Complete that sentence. And persistent. And most laureates are that, for sure. Persistent. And it may take a long time. So those are all important. And there are limits, which we've already talked about, I think, last week. But to deal with what we didn't talk about last week, a limit of 3. Well, we know that these are laboratory, at least many of these projects these days are fairly large. I mean, the lab is large, meaning over 100 people working at the lab, postdocs, doctoral students, that kind of things, and colleagues at your level, all contribute to this. And so how do you award a prize to just 1, 2, or 3 people? Well, it's really tricky, because you've got the assumption here is that all the brains are at the top, and the rest are just kind of doing the donkey work. Well, they weren't doing the donkey work. And if you were Niels Bohr, as I mentioned either last week or the week before, you're a very social animal. And almost every decision or thought is a collaborative one. It was in the nature of the man to operate that way. So how do you assign, oh, Niels Bohr did this, Heisenberg didn't. Or Heisenberg did this, but not Niels Bohr. It didn't work that way. Not like Rutherford's lab, where it was pretty clear who was the guiding light. Only 3 sciences recognized, math and engineering left out. That's, strictly speaking, that's not true. Penrose is a mathematician. And the climate Nobel, one of the 3 awarded the prize was a mathematician for the modeling, the math behind the modeling. Some of them are awkward prizes, like manager prize. I mean, some of these prizes for work that involved hundreds of contributing scientists. I remember when that gravitational wave first paper came out, there were over 2,000 names on that. So you're going to tell me that one person or two people deserve that thing? And we're talking about engineers. Most experimental physicists are really cloaked engineers. They have engineering skills. They know how to build stuff. They know how to create the mechanics of the lab, including making equipment. Interesting Marie Curie here, very interesting because it speaks to women in science, because her first Nobel Prize, and she was more than an equal contributor to that prize. There were three, including her husband on that first one. The Nobel Committee did not want to include her name, despite that. And she was very involved. I mean, she was very hands-on. She was actually stirring the pot and doing a lot of the physical work, but a lot of the brain work too. And she's was a very interesting woman, very bright, well-trained in math and physics. The second Nobel Prize was fascinating because she got it as a solo prize this time. She earned it on her own. But at the last moment, the Nobel Committee thought, whoa, mistake, because of a scandal she was involved with, an affair with a married man and children in Paris. And she was really quite upset about that, and not to deny it, but she sent a note off to the chairman, whom she knew, and she said, look, the prize is for the science, not my life. They gave her the prize. They did the right thing. And so, gutsy woman, though, to have done that in that time. So this is what, oh yeah, this is one of my favorites. These two did really elegant work on the relationship on the sensory system. And the sensory system, nerve fibers have complex proteins at their end, and some of them are really neat. And how they transduce mechanical stimuli or thermal stimuli into an electrical signal, and they're quite complex proteins embedded in cell membranes, and they worked out the genetics of this. What was the relationship between genes and the actual protein? Marvelous work, and very well done by both of them. He is no longer a productive, at least as far as I know. About every few months, I see a paper in Nature in which he's a co-author and a very active participant in the stuff. So he's continuing to contribute, as far as I know. Well, this is one of my favorites. Samantha Pablo. This is Mr. Artaig DNA. That's a brand new field that he pioneered. Rescuing DNA and stitching it together, because DNA is very fragile in a moist environment, and even if not in a moist environment, it tends to fragment, break, and it's kind of a puzzle how the pieces actually fit together, and reconstructing these ancient genomes. And he did it really well. Excellent leader and very collaborative. He's at the Max Planck Institute, the senior position there, and you'll love this one. This is his award at the Max Planck. It's something they do at the Max Planck. If you win a Nobel Prize, this is what happens to you. They throw you in this pond. Not multiple times, but anyway. So there he is. Doesn't look very clear water, does it? Yeah. And I wonder how cool it is. And if you see a little crocodile there, yeah.
I recommend a book by Adam Rutherford. It's called The History of Everyone Who Ever Lived, where he is mentioned quite throughout the book.
Yeah. He's a wonderful guy. He really comes across as a first-class leader in the lab. And just a little back history on that. It happened with Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Carpentier, remember the gene editing story. And we really had a big problem here between the United States and Europe. Carpentier is, of course, French. Jennifer Doudna from UCal, and Stanford. And they clearly were ahead. But Harvard has big money and big influence, and the Broad Institute got into this. They were busily suing one another, but initiated initially by the Broad Institute, who tried to horn in on it. They obviously targeted getting the Nobel Prize, publicity that went with it. It's very interesting that the Nobel people is not mentioned. And the same happened, a Harvard, European kind of thing, with Svante Pääbo, this guy. Because one of his students went back to the United States, all kinds of resources at Harvard, established his own lab, and then plowed ahead because of all these things, and kind of tried to grab the limelight, but he was not all that creative. He was using Pääbo's tools, his method. Nobel Committee, no mention. They had their own way, and when it came to Jennifer Doudna and Carpentier, they, again, no mention of the Broad Institute. Interestingly enough, the European Union ruled in favor, their court, ruled in favor of the Doudna and Carpentier, and no surprise, the American courts sided with their own, the Broad Institute. Not quite sure where this is in the courts, but it's a mess. It's a very embarrassing kind of mess. And just looking at the record of where did the research come from, where did the ideas come from, it belongs to the two women, for sure. So, very, and it has consequences. Now, I love this slide. We'll see how observant you are when you look at this, because this is time back 2 million years ago, right up to the present. This is the interglacial period up here, the warmer period. So we're in, if I don't knock off this computer, we're up here, global warming down here. So these are cycles, up and down cycles from interglacial to glacial period. So cold down at the bottom, warm at the top. These cycles, what do they represent? They occur about every 100,000 years, or they do now. But if you look at this thing, that's not the way it's been. Now, this is related to the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and that's influenced by the gravitational effects of all the planets in our solar system, and not just the Sun. So there's a certain serendipity in this kind of thing. But if you look at this, well, I counted them up before I came here today. There are 20 such cycles in the first million years, and 10 or 11 in the second. So clearly the cycle period has changed. And furthermore, the extent of the warming and cooling period, the amplitude is much less than it is down here. So the cycles get wilder. It's a fascinating kind of thing. It's also, I'm going to talk about an extinction right now, and on that same time frame, it occurred here, 900,000 years ago. Humans emerged, or Neanderthal, the common root of modern humans and Neanderthals, 600,000, 500 to 600,000 years ago. Just to put this in reference, so you have some idea. And the common ancestor of humans and apes would be about over here on that same scale. So you have it in scale. And woolly mammoths, or elephant-like creatures, been around for a long time. The oldest salvaged DNA, it was really incomplete, but around 2 million years ago. The drier the climate, the better. Now, what about this? Here's this thing, I did show this in the meditation and mindfulness series, just as an interest breaker, not because of mindfulness. But it illustrates a major human or pre-human extinction that occurred a little less than 100,000 years ago. There's the scale, 800,000 years ago, 600, 400, 200. And the estimated human population at that time was a little less, well, around 100,000. And bingo, it's a thread. It drops to something like from 100,000 to less than 2,000. And it remains that way for over 100,000 years. And it doesn't really recover until humans, modern humans, would have come on the scene around in here, right in here. And there's the major dispersal out of Africa here 60, 70,000 years ago. So it's helpful to have perspective in this kind of thing, see the big picture. And, but isn't that amazing? We might not be here in this room. If that thread had been any threadier, we wouldn't be here in this room holding this series. And we don't know that this is not the only similar extinction at that time. So it's a great study in science. Did a great job. What's it based on? An analysis of modern day DNA and working backwards. And looking at which genes are very highly conserved and less highly conserved. So you can actually figure this out. All right, well, here we are. And through all of this, Katie, she calls herself K-A-T-I, Katie, is always smiling. And there's Drew, who looks a little dour. So let's see what they did. I had to save another picture. She's actually wearing the same top as in the other photo. And she probably doesn't have a big closet. She probably didn't care about that kind of stuff, I would think. And he doesn't. So anyway, he has a family, and I think a couple of children, 2 or 3 children. Well, what about Katie? So the Nobel Prize this year, born 1955, Hungary. And she came up, remember I mentioned just a few minutes ago, all that advice about finding the best mentors and the best schools and that kind of thing. Well, that wouldn't have been open to her. Her road was going to be harder. Not only was she not male, but it was harder to get into many of these things. It's kind of Marie repeated much later. So that's Katie, and there's Drew. Now they worked together in this key period right here at New Penn. And it's the same prize motivation. They shared, or each of them received half the prize. And so what was it before then? What was the status of most vaccines? Well, I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to say that vaccines have been around a long time, either using live attenuated or sometimes dead viruses, or an inactivated virus, or some component of a virus, as in hepatitis B. The problem with all of these approaches is that it's really very expensive in time and money to develop vaccines. And if we had based our response to COVID on this kind of approach, we'd still be in the middle of COVID. And here's the thing from the New England Journal of Medicine, a great article by Penny Heaton, the COVID-19 Vaccine Development Multiverse. It's a really great article written in 2020, so right when the first vaccine's coming out. So it's all very fresh. The genome had been sequenced in China, resequenced in the United States in less than a year. Can you imagine? 2 quite effective mRNA vaccines, almost identical in their effectiveness, are developed using the same off-the-shelf technologies that were developed over the previous 20 years. They have been on the shelf waiting for something like this to happen, maybe 2 or 3 years before. Thank goodness the stuff was on the shelf. That's one of the arguments sometimes for basic science, and it's a very compelling one, because unless you develop the basic science, you can't do that kind of stuff in 2 years or even a year. The technology has to be there. But look at clinical trials, and which is a big thing with the New England Journal of Medicine, at least in North America. Boy, does that ever gobble up time? The phase 1 study, first the safety test, the phase 3 safety test, and whether it creates allergenic responses, phase 3, how effective is it? Boy, it takes money big time, and recruitment, they are very expensive, take a long time. The NIH compressed that. They really responded quite quickly. It wasn't just mRNA vaccines. They remember those trials? They were done in months. And that was very different than other things before. Because, I mean, it's a very slow process. 3 to 8 years. I mean, if you add up the kind of standard way of going to this, what do you get? Even at a minimum, 3, let's do 5, 6 years at a minimum, 6. Worst case, 8, 18, 20 years to develop a vaccine. So this is definitely slow-mo and very expensive, and no response at all to what was going to happen. Well, this is the virus. It's not a very endearing one to have all these thousands of viruses, COVID viruses in our cells, because it looks like a great graveyard on the way. And of course, COVID, it targeted a lot of systems. One of the common themes is it went after ACE2 receptors in vessels, blood vessels. So any organ that had a blood supply was attacked. And as those with particularly rich blood supply, where would that be? The lungs, especially the lower lungs, where all the exchange of gases is taking place. That's why it was such a killer. And I don't know whether you remember or not, I certainly do. Remember the chaos in New York City when COVID hit New York City the first time in 2000? Wow. People with heart attacks left, right, and center. They couldn't do posts on them because the pathologists didn't want to do the post. And there were trucks lined up outside the hospital taking the bodies away. Wow, we forget how bad it was in the beginning before any vaccine. And then the thing that characterized it for many, this loss of smell and taste. And I should say this, the UK had a brain bank, and thousands of UK volunteers, or these volunteered for MRI studies, say 5-10 years before this, with no specific goal in mind except banking this information. And then they were able to turn to this bank, and do the MRIs on patients with COVID. And what was really interesting was the high incidence of abnormalities in the brain. Not necessarily, they weren't correlating this with clinical stuff, clinical findings. They just took all comers of COVID and ran them through the MRI machine. What did it show? As expected, it begins in the kind of nasal passage and then moves in the base of the brain and spreads from there. And but anyway, what did it kill? 500,000 Americans, and by Canadian standards, that would be 50,000 Canadians. I don't know what the number was for Canada, and those are the ones that killed. It disabled a lot of other people. So it's a multi-system disease. Well, here is one that I thought might do very well. Remember all the controversy about the Oxford vaccine? Instead of using mRNA is a messenger. It's the messenger nucleoprotein that carries a message from DNA in the nucleus to tell ribosomes in the cytoplasm what protein to make. So it's the messenger boy or girl between the two. It's the connector between the two. The trouble with DNA is it has to pass through the cell membrane and the nuclear membranes before it makes its viral protein, so it's more complex. It's also carried in by a virus. That's how it gets in, so you better hope the virus is inactive. And always one of the risks, I mean, I don't think there was ever any evidence that it happened, but listen, if you're transplanting DNA into somebody, you better be sure it doesn't become incorporated in the person's DNA past the infection. No danger of that with mRNA. The train doesn't go the other direction. You can't get the DNA from mRNA. Well, here's the central dogma of the first 50 years of molecular biology, beginning with Watson and Crick with DNA. That's the central dogma, the creation story, if you like, in science of cellular physiology. DNA, translated as genes, makes the messenger boy, makes a copy of itself, single strand, mRNA, messenger RNA, which then exits the cell into this elaborate process and literally dictates the order which amino acids are added to a growing protein. That's what it does, the two of them. The first process is called transcription, and the second, translation. You're really translating mRNA into protein. That's what you're doing. Long before COVID came along, people were really interested in mRNA as a means of treating diseases associated with dysfunctional proteins. And as a neurologist, here are the two that are pertinent for me, because progressive muscular atrophy is a nasty disease. It's kind of Lou Gehrig's disease on jets, and it strikes children before they're born or very early in life, and they're usually dead within months or a few years from this severe paralysis. And it's because of a dysfunctional gene, but one way of getting around that is to carry the correct message in with messenger RNA, bypass the DNA in the nucleus that's not working, that's creating a mutant protein. And believe me, it works. It's incredible. The first study was done in France, and I mean, these little kitties, they couldn't stand, certainly couldn't walk, having trouble swallowing, holding their head up. And did they get back to normal? No. Did they actually do something that no one has ever done in ALS, regain a function? They did. And so that was very promising. And some of the muscular dystrophies, same kind of thing. So I think that's where mRNA is going to go. mRNA, a lot of the effort that's gone into it was kind of sidetracked because of COVID. But it's really an effective tool for doing a whole lot of other things. And there are some problems with mRNA by itself. The single strand is unstable. mRNA was probably there, not at the birth, but soon after when life appeared. But it's a very fragile strand, easily breaks up, that kind of thing, unstable. So the lab versions of messenger RNA, one of the problems early on was that mRNA made in the lab produces or provokes a brisk immune response, an inflammatory response, which was the huge hurdle, which is what these two people solved. That's the problem they solved. To solve the problem, Grieco and Weissman altered one of the bases in the lab-created mRNA. You know that DNA and messenger RNA, the same thing, have 4 bases, same 4 bases kind of rotating in different orders. But, and it worked, so we'll just see, have a look at that. What they did, it was a clever idea, was that one of the bases is uridine, and they substituted pseudo-uridine, great name for that. And lo and behold, when they did that, the result was far less inflammatory response and many more copies of the viral antigen. So, right, they got around the immune system and the cell. They haven't got around the problem from injection to getting into the cell, but that's where that fatty lipid nanoparticle comes in. That's a terrible slide, but isn't this clever? Compare these 2 molecules. Here's uridine and pseudo-uridine. You know what's happened? They simply flipped the nitrogen and carbon here. So there's pseudo-uridine. What was nitrogen in this spot became carbon, and what was carbon here became nitrogen. They just flipped. And we've been talking about electrons and bond making for the last 2 sessions. And that's kind of what's happening. Very clever, not as easy as I'm making it sound. And look at how complex this actually looks. I mean, we think about this fatty little capsule carrying the messenger RNA. There's the messenger RNA right in here. And here's this lipid nanoparticle, this group of kind of fat, 4 different lipids, phospholipid, cholesterol, I don't know what PEG lipid is, but anyway, very complex, very neat actually. And here's the process, reduced to its simplest. Here's the lipid nanoparticle, the mRNA that they want to send in to create these spike proteins. That's what they want to do. The idea here is to create a whole lot of spike proteins that are incapable of infecting somebody, but are capable of generating a brisk immune response. So if the body now encounters spike proteins on a live virus, they can take action. That's what the idea is here. So into the cytoplasm of the cell, where it's translated into a sequence of amino acids which create the spike protein. And it makes a lot of these spike proteins, and then they kind of stick on the cell surface here. And then any immunological cell that's kind of primed to do something comes across them and identifies them as foreign, and then raises an immune response, either a cellular response or in this case an immune. That's an immunoglobulin. Anything that, like a Y or inverted Y, is an immunoglobulin on the surface of the cell. So that's about as simple as it gets. I'm not going to go through this. That's for the Lasker Foundation. But here we are. Here's the COVID-19 vaccine efficacy after the first dose. So we're going right back to what, 21? Yeah, late 2021. And so 21,000 got the mRNA-based vaccine. The other placebo was right here. Well, those who got the vaccine, hardly any became infected, with one exception. And look at this cumulatively over time. There was the progress, so you can see. But black dot means severe enough to be hospitalized. So in this long string along here, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 on the placebo side, 1 on the mRNA. So not total escape, not total protection. But they never claimed that. If you remember the original studies, 90% protection against hospitalization, but not 100%. No vaccine is anywhere near that. In fact, these mRNA vaccines were much better than most standard vaccines with which we were acquainted. So, current and future developments, well, RSV, I hope all in the group looking around at your ages, the same as mine, even though you need to pay for it or somebody else to pay for it, it makes a lot of sense because people who are at high risk are us. And the bad news is it strikes the same dangerous area as COVID does, meaning that lower respiratory system. So that's not good. So my advice, I'm booked in 2 days for this, so I'll think about that. Malaria, there, talk about a big success story. Malaria kills more people than COVID does around the world. And the World Health Organization approved a second malaria vaccine. And one thing here, just as a side thing, if you take that string of mRNA, that fragile string, and you turn it into a loop, it's a lot more stable as a loop. So this may be a way forward in making mRNA vaccines even more effective. Well, this is always a worry, isn't it? I mean, there are almost 8 billion of us. Many of us in Asia, South Asia, West Asia, well, elsewhere in the world, all of Africa, live lives very close to animals. We eat them, but they're around. They're in our gardens, they're in the neighborhood farms. And those animals can't transmit. So COVID happens to be one example, but there are lots of others. And when's the next one going to hit? It's only a matter of time. Now this is the response, recent response, in the United States of, so this would be the Biden's team, about what to do for the future. Well, we can continue to do as is, meaning constant updates to mRNA vaccines that target the spike protein. Well, we know what that looks like. It's very effective. It's not completely effective, but it's very effective. But as the Israelis show, the protection lasts about 4 months. And it's waning seriously by the 5 to 6 month mark. So we're going to keep that up 3 times a year, forever. It's a crazy way to go, and very expensive to do that way. The NIH, back in, before the pandemic, there was a proposal to develop, look, why not develop a universal vaccine? Now the key to developing a universal vaccine is to target the most genetically conserved regions. The regions in the virus that are least likely to mutate on it or move. So they're a steady target. You know, you get them in your sight and they're dodging off one way and mutating their way around you. So target the most conserved sites of the virus, and there are conserved sites, such as the membrane of the virus. I mean, the mRNA vaccines targeted particular regions on the spike protein, but what about the rest of the virus? They didn't. And so this made a lot of sense. And then combine that, as the proposal went, look, we already been through coronavirus infections, some quite serious. Remember SARS? I still remember Toronto almost shut down with SARS at one time, and killed off a relative on Jan's side, unfortunately. So include antigens from every known coronavirus around, including all the ones out in the wild, collectively. From every bat cave or hole where they're there, collect the genomes. and then create a vaccine that recognizes all of them. Makes sense to me. It had a high priority as a project early in the pandemic, but it was turned down. Why was it turned down? Because the mRNA vaccines were so promising early on, and everyone was really screaming to get the ball rolling. But it doesn't explain why the NIH turned this proposal down recently after the COVID crisis. That's a crazy short-range way of doing things. It makes no sense to me. Now, other little tools that might, people who don't like needles, skin patches or nasal sprays, but that's tinkering around the edge, isn't it? And furthermore, the government in the U.S. committed around $20 billion in that great crisis period at the start of the plan, and now it's $5 billion. So they obviously don't see a lot of risk. And one of the problems that COVID did is it divided people around the world, right? We had the high-risk groups, like the very young, and especially our group. But then there's a large middle group that kind of sailed through stuff. They got a little bit of a cold-like thing, or not much, or that kind of thing. And so it was kind of, well, it's not me. And then people just kind of cruised through stuff. Now, I have to say, I was very impressed with people generally in the first year because people did socially distance, they did wear their masks, and that was very effective, very, very effective. We would have done much worse in that first year before any vaccine came out, so 2020. If that English version, UK version had hit in 21 January, as it did, without any vaccines, we would have been in deep trouble. And so now, just to get on with a little more stuff, meeting at the photocopier. These two people, there's a story here, not a romantic story, there's a story here. With Katie and Vice. Katie, as she will say for herself, this book, Hans Seve's book, The Stress of Life. I don't know that we mentioned that in our series on David, on mindfulness and meditation, but Hans is a Hungarian Canadian, and she used this key all of her life. Her teacher gave her this book and said, try it out. It suggests to me that there had been stress in that period, or he would have given her the book. And so, and what she faced in her career, it was really quite extraordinary, more than faced Weissman. Ignored at one time, threatened with deportation. At one time, she was working all alone because she lost all of her funding and actually took no salary. Extraordinary. And no one stepped in to help her out. Her grant applications repeatedly turned down. Now, a lot of those grant applications were the two of them. Her applications. So she was facing the law. Now, I'm going to deal with Drew Weissman first because, if you win a prize, you can guarantee that you're going to get a lot of requests for graduation exercises and paid talks. So this is his advice in a speech to a class of fresh graduates, not freshly, but fresh graduate physicians in 2021. So he would wish them a lifetime of frustration. I'm sure I would have done that, but here, I do get what he's talking about. The person who achieves his goal, from his point of view, is the one that has faced frustration and dealt with it, understood it, and used it to their advantage. We, the two of them, fell, were knocked down, ignored, and we kept getting up, and we didn't give up. That's true. That's true of both of them. for sure. So in the face, and even their best work on mRNA and the way to get around the immune response, those papers were turned down several times. And they're good papers. If you look at the references, the sources, those are foundational papers. So now, here we have, she will speak for herself. This is after the Lasker Prize, or in the course of the Lasker Prize, all these recipients are kind of asked to say something about their story. So it's an interesting one. So here we go. I hope I don't screw this up.
And now, the 2021 laureates in clinical research.
I grew up in a small Hungarian town with a population of 10,000. As a little girl, I liked to climb up trees to check out the bird nest and watch the neighbors' cow give birth. I was curious. My science teachers made sure that I stayed curious for life and encouraged me to keep learning. Though I have never actually seen a scientist, I decided that that is what I will do. Now, today, receiving the Lasker Award, I have been able to reflect on my humble beginnings and the long, winding road on which I have arrived. In high school, my teacher handed me a book called The Stress of Life, in which Hans Scheyer wrote that adopting the right attitude can convert a negative stress into a positive one. This book was my guide through the years as I continued the journey of becoming a scientist. I remember Scheyer words when I experienced failures as a student or in the lab. So I adopted the right attitude, searched for ways to improve myself, to work harder, be more creative, and perform better. I always try to focus on things that I can do and not waste any time on things that I cannot. I began my work with RNA as a graduate student in 1978 and have been passionate about this fragile molecule ever since. I learned the ways that RNA can be made, modified, how it degrades or translates into proteins. I love the enigmatic nature of RNA-related phenomena and enjoyed revisiting experimental outcomes that I couldn't explain decades earlier.
Wow.
I am always delighted when scientific puzzles that I try to decode myself are ultimately solved by others. My greatest joy in science have been the small and large victories in the lab. Even if an experiment fails, it teaches us something that we could build upon. Together with my colleagues, we inch towards a solution building upon discoveries of scientists who came before us and created the optimal RNA suitable for therapy. Never in a million years would I have imagined that it would be used to create a vaccine to combat a global pandemic. While I am accepting my Lasker Award, I think about all those hardworking fellow scientists who are, just like me, passionate about their work and immensely contributed to the success of the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine. I also think about all the young girls who may become inspired by my story and want to become scientists. To them I say, stay curious, adopt the right attitude, and stay on track, no matter how long and winding that road may be.
Isn't that amazing?
Great.
That's amazing. You couldn't write it better. What a blueprint for male or female at that age, but especially women, even these days, and in science. I mean, if you look at, let's see, get myself out of here. I'm going to be able to read this. Maybe I'm not. No, too stupid. And she's actually working somewhere else. But you know, one of the things I liked about that, if you just look at the language she uses, she, you know, the words are delight and enjoy the process. She's obviously not put off by failure, and she's patient, works hard, she's very collaborative. All those things come together. That's her track record. That's a well-known track record for her. She's not inventing that stuff. That's true. And I thought it was really quite amazing. So I wanted you to actually see that. Now we're over our time. We could go on with other things, but any thoughts on this? You can see why I wanted that at the end, because I think her story is actually as important, if not more important, than the mRNA story. And hopefully it's a lasting one. In fact, I thought at home last evening, thinking about this, and I thought, you know, I don't know about you, but I wasn't taught science well at all in public school and high school, even in so-called very good schools. And I have a grandson in Alaska going to a faith-based school, good one. But how can all this interesting stuff be happening and do not mention any of this stuff to kids at home? They never did when I was a kid, and the stuff was going on. We are looking at not all the best, probably not any more than 2% of the best, but we are at least looking at 2% of the best. And that's what we can learn from. So why isn't this kind of stuff being taught that way? I don't get it. Why should you have to be in university? And even late into university. I mean, one of the things that in my first time in Oxford, so back in 69, 70, was that I went over, like a lot of people, you know, after some graduate work, and they had an undergraduate course in anatomy, believe it or not. I'm a physiologist, and so were all of them. But it's in an anatomy department. Go for it, you know, that's Oxford. And so the course was, I've never seen anything like it since. It was to take the 50, or sometimes years 100, most influential, best done papers in physiology, and that's all they studied. And for a third of those, they were encouraged to actually repeat the experiment, to find out just how difficult it was to do and what the pitfalls were. There's no other way to learn that kind of stuff. Oh, can we
I was
move on?
gonna say, did you need me to put it back on for you?
Yeah, exactly. It's a male thing. I don't know how to do it.
Oh, what, sorry?
I need a female.
Oh. So it'll be this one.
Yeah, I was.
There we go.
Yeah, she says. So what it taught people was the fundamental. You don't even get that stuff in graduate school. You don't get it as a postdoc in most places. And yet that was the second year. And I thought that was really, really important as a lesson. And then I tried to follow that up at Tufts and to some extent at Mac. Well, Mac has a kind of a system like that. Yeah. And anyway, listen, we're past our time, so we have to leave. But I just wanted to make a few other things. If you look at the Nobel Committee material, they include the reference sources. And even the finest Nobel work probably has no more than 50 or 60 references. Now this is a Nobel Committee choice, so not the guy or gal who wrote the stuff. It's their choice. And these are the journals, at least, that keep coming up all the time. Nature, Science, and in the clinical stuff, Lancet from the UK, or the New England Journal of Medicine, or for general science, National Academy of Sciences in the US. And for this particular stuff, I just added up all the stuff. And, and that's it. Virtually every single prize in science, the same pattern happens. So if you want to know what's going on, that's where you go. But this is the thing that worries me, and I hope it worries you. Well, I'm very pleased for the companies who are on the rise. China in the top 10, 50, and 100 universities, those groups, weighted by international experts and citation indices. So China's right at the top, within the top 10. It had no university in the top 10 years ago, none. It had 3 last year in the top 10, and Oxford and Cambridge were in the second tier. So that shows you what the quality is like. And the US, of course, has its standard collection, but it's starting to lose. It's sliding now. And my prediction is, remember I mentioned who's getting the Nobel Prizes initially? That kind of 80% of the world wasn't. Well, my prediction is that in the next 20 or 30 years, we're going to see stuff from not only China, but India, and for sure other South Asian, Muslim, and African countries. And I think the trend is obvious in the number of undergraduates and postgrads from the world who have trained in the US, Europe, and UK in recent decades, who now provide mature leadership at home. So you are looking at the future, I think, and the near future. Now, the problem is much is hidden on the technical side. Biden, at least China and the US are now talking, but much is hidden on the technical side because of defense contracts. And that's certainly true with AI, big time with AI, and quantum computers. So, although we're not going to do that. Well, I'm going to do that because it ties the stuff all together. This is the last one I'll kind of show you. It's always nice to have perspective. Where did you come from? Where are you going? Where are you in the journey? Well, from a biological point of view, you know, we've had 4 sessions, 3 on quantum mechanics. So that's the subatomic world. So before there was life, there were subatomic particles and energies and that kind of thing before life. I don't know whether you know this or not, but simple carbon-based molecules are actually very common out in space. That might involve 2 or 3 different atoms. They're common. And probably not a few seed various planetary bodies, and probably almost certainly Earth at one time. Which came first, single strands of RNA, amino acids? Well, we'll never know because we're never going to get back to that thing, at least now. But here's the progression. Stars, I mentioned this before, stars, as complex as they are in making the elements, in creating different atoms, increasing weight, that's complex for sure. But a lot more complex are cells, biological systems, much more complex. So simple single cells for 2 billion years. 1.5 to 2 billion years. Life will go back 4 billion years, might come back a little bit further, but simple for a long time. Complex single cells, let's say mitochondria, mammalian cells, that kind of thing. And then the Cambrian explosion, you've heard that, around 500, the great extinction, and then the great flowering of life after that. But that's only 500 million years ago. So if you were visiting Earth 500,000 years ago, or 500 million years ago, or 1 billion years ago, you wouldn't see much of interest. To simple multicellular organisms, to complex multicellular life forms, to intelligent, aware life forms. You can see the way things are stacking. And highly intelligent social life forms, who like to think that's us, who actually create complex language, art in all its forms, travel the near reaches of space, and increasingly understand the nature of the universe and the planet they inhabit, and the nature of life, including themselves, but whose biochemistry differs little from that at the beginning over 4 billion years ago. Same 4 bases. Proteins are probably made the same way, and lipids and that kind of thing. So huge, the way nature works, if something works, it holds on to it. If it works, why change it? If it doesn't, well, then some other adaptation or adaptations, plural, will take place. But it's nice to have this kind of framework when you're thinking about things, because you can get really obsessed with us as a species living now. But we're only a very, very thin slice of time. And I don't know how long we'll last. Certainly our sun will not last more than 3 or 4 billion years. It's a long time, admittedly. But anyway, it's kind of useful to have some frame of reference, I think. And also to realize that we're one of trillions of life-friendly planets like us. And for most of our history, we didn't look very life-friendly from space. So a lot of fortuitous things had to happen to end up making us. But let's face it, most of nature doesn't really care about us. In fact, probably 99.999% of them kind of indifferent to us, except when we cause their extinction. Other things. So I think it's an interesting way of thinking about things. That's why I like science. It has that dimension to it. And it also is a very, it's a universal trans-language, trans-culture discipline. And there aren't many of those things, precious few of those these days. We need more of them. So that's the story. So next, change gears, and David Elkins takes over next week. And we are going to do which one first, David?
Yeah, I'm doing economics next week.
Yeah, but which
Which is
one?
the
Economics? Economics.
Yes.
And then you're going to do the Peace Prize.
And then the Peace Prize. Valmai and I will share the
Valmai's
Peace
there.
Prize.
Oh, good, okay, well,
And
whatever.
it's women all the way down from now on.
Right. Right, well, we're overdue for that. Particularly when you see, just a minute, let me see. Isn't this a great slide here? The women for prizes in medicine, physics, and chemistry are this is Curie, by the way, 1, 2 prizes here. And there aren't many orange dots, are there? And those are the women. That's a really compelling picture. I think women are better represented in the, I don't know about economics.
Well, in
certainly-
economics, there have been 3 women,
Yeah.
including the one this year, and she is the first solo receiver. The others have been women in other groups.
Okay, well, that's the big story coming. I think it's a really interesting story, so, and David tells it well. So that's what's coming the next 2, and then Valmai cleans it all up with the literature prize.
It's a very interesting prize for the literature prize.
Yes.
As it turns out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there we are. Thank you. I don't know about you guys, I enjoy this stuff. But that one says, I don't have to say much, just look at it.
Yes. It's quick.
All right.
You got Sally absolutely right. And they didn't even give her a Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
The stress of life, and you got nothing for it.
Yeah, I was trying, because David Elkins and I put on this mindfulness meditative series, which is very good actually, except that both of us got COVID in the middle of it.
The Nobel Prize missed one.
But the roots are deep. And Hans was one of the early people into what we would call mindfulness.
The 2000 prize for physics went to the wrong people. It had been discovered 40 years before. The whole story laid out, and we missed it. The Nobel Committee completely missed it.
Yeah.
And the embarrassment of having it missed it. So it's,
They don't often make mistakes, but sometimes they do.
the quantum thing really deserves, but it's counterintuitive. Quantum that doesn't make sense really for some.
Well, actually, I pointed out to you last week that those two universes are coming together. And which is why I created that slide. Because without electrons doing their thing, the atom doing the nucleus doing its thing, no compounds, no complex